Hey guys, what's up? This is Patrick. In this video, we're going to dissect some of the hands that Garrett has played on the Hustler Live Casino livestream. And what we're going to be doing is I'm going to use Garrett's hands to show you guys some data that I've got in this database for live poker. And the reason I'm making this video is because I want to draw some attention to the course that I made, Dominate with Data, that's now live on Run It Once. And I recently added a complete live poker section where I went through the entire database that I've got and quantified every node of the game tree. And so when you are playing live, oftentimes what of the questions I get from live poker players is, it's kind of nice that you've got this data thing, but is it applicable to my games? Because I can see my opponents and like they might be playing looser or tighter or whatever, and that might be of influence. And that's why I made a complete section in the Dominate with Data live course that's now live on Run It Once, and every piece of data is in there. So if you're interested in that, head over to Run It Once. I'll put a link in the description down below and in the pinned comments. And yeah, let's just get started. All right, so Garrett opens 3x in this straddle game, which is pretty standard. We get a call. This is kind of iffy, but the Wesley's 3-bet is kind of small here. So this is close on whether you can make it work, but Garrett has a pretty significant skill edge here, I would guess. So this would be, I would guess that this is indifferent. Like you're relatively deep, your hand is pretty bad, but the 3-bet is very small. And so hands like ace 9, ace 8 might become indifferent, but it's close. We face a pot size bet by Wesley here, and Wesley plays 40-24. So clearly recreational type stats. The distinction between regulars and recreationals in the live poker arena is oftentimes a bit like that line is hard to draw because Garrett himself is also playing relatively loose, for instance, and much looser than you'll see many of the online racks play, especially in like this is a 6-handed game, but in some 8-handed game. Having said that, this is clearly recreational territory. Like 40 VPIP, 24 PFR is just too wide, and so we can just assume that Wesley is recreational. I've seen him play on 1 or 2 streams. I don't want to be, and also I haven't seen too many of his hands, so I don't know whether he's actually playing bad or like whether he tries to make it work. Like the streams that I've seen him play more nitty, but that's, yeah, like obviously 40-24 is just pretty wide. When it comes to the c-bet size, this is not typically a c-bet size you use on a board like this. And the reason is very simple. Both players have a ton of flushes. And so when you bet really large, you isolate yourself too much versus the strong hands that the in-position player here has and that you have as well. And so in a way you could kind of view it as if you go in here with a flush, you're only getting called by a flush, and so no one's really making money. The advantage that you have here is that you're going to have hands like queens, jacks, kings, and maybe hands like, I don't know, like ace 10, you're going to have probably a little bit more often because Garrett is going to 4-bet some of those, pocket 10s, like stuff like that. That's where the advantage lies for Wesley. And so what he wants to do is actually bet smaller and kind of push equity against some of the very weak holdings like pocket 5s without a diamond and stuff like that. Anyway, Wesley elects to bet pot here, and we can look at the data. This is not Wesley's data, this is just the average recreational in this pool. And you can see in here that the amount of weak hands just goes down as the bet sizing goes up. And this is what should happen. Well, to some extent, like you should go more and more polar. So basically, this is kind of what you see here as well. Like if you're betting pot, you're less likely to bet like middle pair or something like that. Even though recreationals still do it sometimes because they're recreationals. Then from this yellow section onwards, you're looking at top pair plus. Brown is overpair. And you can see like the bigger the bet size, the more likely you're facing an overpair or like top pair type hand, which is kind of standard. Still, if you look at like the 1 times to 1.25 times pot sizing, there's a reasonable amount of random hands in here still, and it is because recreationals 3-bet random hands occasionally. I always think it's something like they've seen a episode of old high stakes poker where Tom Dwan 3-bets 9-7 offsuit and makes it work, and then they want to replicate that. Anyway, in Garrett's shoes here we have a very easy call. You could potentially think about shoving. The problem is your opponent is going to call you with ace king, with the king of diamonds, ace queen with the queen of diamonds, ace jack with the ace of diamonds, jack of diamonds, quite likely. And so you would be literally drawing, which is a bit annoying. Calling is also not like super chill, but you have position, so I guess like it's the best of two not too great options when he puts it. This ace is quite interesting. It's kind of a weird card. A lot of the hands that Wesley has on the flop that want to go big, I'm assuming from Wesley's perspective, are hands like, I don't know, jacks through aces, especially with a diamond. Like I think if you have jacks without a diamond, you probably don't want to pull it because you're just going to isolate yourself versus flushes, but I'm just reading Wesley's mind a little bit here. Scary looking board, so want to bet big and just get as much money in as quickly as possible. And then this ace is kind of a weird card, and Wesley goes half pot here. From Garrett's perspective, he is going to call some ace highs, especially with the ace of diamonds, possibly exclusively with the ace of diamonds. If you have like, I don't know, ace 9 with the 9 of diamonds, you're folding. Ace jack with the jack of diamonds, you're folding. Ace queen, you might be 4-betting sometimes. So kind of a weird dynamic here where you like this actually might be an okay bet size because Garrett doesn't really have a lot of aces, and so betting half pot to squeeze out some calls by a 10 might be okay, although I'm guessing Garrett would just mostly fold this naked 10, so it's kind of a weird dynamic when he goes pot here. If we look at the data for when recreational's second barrel, then you get to see something like this. This is after every bet size on the flop. We can't really filter for pot size, flop bet and turn bet. That's just not how it goes. Just not enough sample if we do that, but you can see this is kind of what it looks like. Half pot is still pretty weak. More than half of it is less than middle pair, and generally speaking you can just call. What would be interesting here, like the decision point here is not too complicated, we just call, right? But what would we do if we had, I don't know, like a random, it's hard to have like a random ace high, I guess, so like, yeah, just a call. Here on the river he goes all in. Garrett obviously calls. What is much more interesting, however, is can Garrett call if the river is, let's say, a deuce of hearts? And for that, we can try to gain an understanding by looking at the bet line that the recreational takes. And we can look here. These are all the different textures, but probably we're better off just looking at the range because the sample is very limited. And we can see that there is 32, 40, 51, 61, 68% of hands that is less than top pair. To be fair, like really small sample and pretty far off. Well, yeah, pretty reasonable. Like if you look at larger database from online, you usually see something that kind of points towards this direction, but is a fair bit stronger. So it could definitely be skewed by the sample size that we have. Having said that, we need to call, like this is the key point in bluff catching, which is always something that a lot of people forget. Like we need to be correct. What is it? Like we need to call, we get like 4.8 to 1. So we need to be correct like in percentages. This is like 18% of the times or something like that. Doing some quick math here. Don't flame me in the comments if this turns out to be badly wrong, but you just need to call, like you need to be correct very occasionally. So like with an ace, you're just definitely going to call even on like a deuce of hearts, because the price that you have to pay is just very little. Garrett calls and he wins versus ace 10, which is kind of an interesting hand. Definitely not strong enough to go pot size flop, but then when you turn two pair, I like the half pot size by Wesley. Yeah, like seems like you block some of the calls and sizing down makes a lot of sense. It's kind of a weird hand though, you shouldn't really pot when you're on the flop. Anyway, next hand we are playing versus Tiger. We cold calling here. Ben is playing in the big blind, clear recreational, and Boris, small blind, and Boris also recreational from what it looks like is in the big blind. So you want to call very wide here, I think. Tiger, let's see, seems to be, yeah, this is just a very good game. Tiger is also seemingly recreational. So just call, hope that you hit a set, which Garrett does here. And he faces a 5 big blinds bet. This bet is going to be way too weak. I can just guarantee you. We don't really need to look at data here because This is just horribly weak. And I would just put more money in now that Tiger is willing to put money in. Like, I would probably raise to like 22 big blinds or something like that here. I'm not saying Garrett made a mistake or anything. And calling in equilibrium could make sense, and exploitively could make sense if, you know, Boris is very aggressive or randomly spewing. But generally, when you're this deep as a recreational, you just want to get more money into the pot, and just raising to 24 big blinds is definitely going to be better. We get a call here, and now we get a half pot bet, and again I would be raising here. Like, we pretty much have the nuts, there's not going to be too much pocket nines, and I would just want to make sure that I get the entire stack or close to it from a recreational. Now Tiger's playing 38-23, so maybe perhaps slightly tighter, but yeah, this is kind of what Garrett does. And Tiger calls, and a check, and all in, and we get a call, and he calls with queens, which is like not going to be a call. Like, if we take Tiger's perspective, like, he should be checking a lot here. This is not his board, and he's going to have a lot of overpairs, but he's going to have a lot of like random king queen, ace queen, ace jack, ace 10, king 10, random broadways that are going to be pretty much worthless here. And if you're just going to be betting your overpairs, then the other players have a very easy strategy. Now you're multi-way, so like, it's a bit, you can play a bit more face up, because Garrett can't really start randomly bluffing because he has to take into account that Boris is still in the hand. But in the grand scheme of things, you need to check a lot, and I would just probably check my entire range here to Garrett. Definitely not just out of betting my pocket queens and all my overpairs here, because the overpairs are also not that strong. Anyway, we get a call by Garrett and check, and then here again I would check. Still a very shitty board for any overpair here. It might seem like it is good, and it would be better if it sets up. And if we have position, let's say we are up against Boris alone, that changes things quite a bit. But we are not, right? We are up against two players. They could have straights, they could have two pair, they could have sets. And it's going to be relatively tough to call three streets with a random 6 here once you're multi-way. And then when you get a raise on the turn, there's this like very basic rule of thumb that anyone can use, which is if you get raised on the turn and you have one pair, it's never good. And that is especially the case when there is someone sitting in a third position. Like, you just fold, and yeah, just fold. Again, other than that, data-wise, there's not much to say here. Like, you just need to fold in. We have another amazing table here, it seems like. Lucky opens playing 65-16, which is just free money he's handing out. Garrett squeezes, and probably rightfully so, because, well, normally you wouldn't squeeze an under the gun open with ace-jack offsuit, but it's lucky he's playing 65-16, and this is something that Garrett is aware of, and so he wants to put a lot of money into the pot, while Lucky still plays really shitty hands. And we go to the flop multi-way with Tom Dwan, which is interesting. And this is an interesting spot. So when you're up against two players, like we were in the previous hand, just from Villain's perspective then, with queens, you generally don't want to c-bet as often as you would in position. And then when you're multi-way, that c-betting frequency goes down even more. Having said that, this board is very good for you, as opposed to the other board. You're going to have ace-king, king-queen, pocket kings, pocket queens, which your opponents don't have at the same frequency. And then there's some king-jack, king-10 that you're going to have. So betting here reasonably often makes sense. You don't really miss this board very often when you squeeze versus two players. So I like this bet by Garrett. We get a call and a fold. And now what we'd want to do, I think, is we want to gain an understanding of how often a recreational like Lucky is going to fold the turn. Now, Lucky is a special fella because he's playing a 65 VPIP. So we'll look at the average recreational, the average player that you are going to be facing in your games, and then we'll try to gain an understanding of whether they are over or under folding. So here we can see how often they are folding, and let me pull up some data here. Right, so here we've got the data facing a second barrel, and then here you can see the folding frequencies. You can see in some sizings we don't really have a lot of sample, and I can give you a rough idea on what the folding frequencies should be. So for a half pot bet, that is this one, the average recreational is folding 37% of the times. In live poker games it should be 30, and then for 3/4 pot they are folding 40% of the times, and it should be 41. So for the smaller sizings there seems to be an overfold, for the larger sizings a little bit less so. And then like if we were to try to take a look at guys with like a very large VPIP, then we can try to do that as well. But we just are not going to have sample. That's like the annoying thing, but we can try to gain an understanding. So call fold, they end up folding less. Not too surprising, but still like seems to be too much for the half pot, but then you can see first 3/4 less so. So be careful, but the sample is very, very shitty here. So we'll just go through the hand, ignoring the data for a second. We have a prime bluffing candidate as we block King Jack suited, although like Lucky probably has some of the offsuited variations as well. And we have the ace of spades in our hand, and so we're going to have a pretty good bluff on river flush closing boards, as well as it makes it a little bit less likely that Willem will call now because he doesn't have ace high flush draws here. Garrett bets, which is fine. I think first the average recreational, I wouldn't, when I use the sizing, necessarily expect an overfold, but that's fine. And then on the river, Garrett has pretty much the best bluff that he can get. And now the question is, if he bluffs, is this going to be overfolded? And we can get an answer on that by looking at the recreational profile again. And here we go. So this is relatively close. The average folding frequency is 38. It is 33 for Pio. You get a slight overfold. It's not massive. Slide overfold on average. The sample size is pretty low, however. On average, recreationals overfold the river by roughly 11 percent points. The average folding frequency on any of the lines is 37 for Pio and 48 for the recreational. So on average, when you bluff the river, you get a slight overfold. In this line, it's a bit closer. Having said that, if I was Garrett here, I would probably bet any size and just hope and pray that we get a fold. If we have brokers to some of the hands that are clearly going to be calling, like Jack 10 and ace high flushes, and Lucky is going to have random hands in his range that now will have to fold, most likely, like Queen Jack, Queen 10. Weak kings might need to fold, although I'm not entirely sure if Lucky is going to be able to do that. Garrett goes all in. I like this, just put maximum amount of pressure on Lucky, and then Lucky ends up calling here with Jack 10, the hand that Garrett blocks. So this hand we are never going to try to make fold. I think Garrett wasn't intending to make him fold that, but a hand like Queen Jack, Queen 10, Ace Queen maybe, those hands are definitely going to be in a tough spot. And then some of the weaker kings that Lucky occasionally has are going to cringe a little bit here as well. So tough spot all around. I like the way Garrett played it though. Let's go to the next hand. And this is an interesting spot. We are playing a, what is this, like 9-handed game? 8-handed game. And we get an open by Stanley. And Stanley plays 39-21 and Brown Bala, whom I've played with a little bit in the Coin Poker Challenge. At 100, 200 I think. It's just like, generally, it seemed like a pretty decent regular. Like, made actually a pretty cool bluff, I think, in the challenge when I played with him. So, yeah, like this cold call from Garrett, you typically don't see, especially when both players are fairly shallow stacked, because, well, Garrett is going to be capped and folding a lot, and so Stanley has the incentive now, if he has Ace Jack offsuit or Ace Queen offsuit, to just go and raise to like 45. And put a lot of pressure on Garrett specifically. So basically, Garrett is giving away free money in a sense. He's somewhat capped here. Anyway, in these types of games, I wouldn't expect 4-bets very often. So this is probably not the worst line to take. I probably would just fold though. Unless like I know both players are, like one of them is Lucky or something. If Lucky is sitting here under the gun, I would be okay, whatever. Check, 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 and then Garrett hits gin on the turn, kind of, because it's a flush closing turn and a straight closing turn, and we get a check. I really like this check by Garrett, by the way. Both players are not going to have a lot of nines, but if they do, they're always going to check back. So when you hold 2 nines in your hand, you make it less likely that either player has a 9 that they would check back, and a little bit more likely that they are going to have a random unpaired hand that is going to bluff, or a random value hand like a king that is now willing to bet the turn. So when you block the set here, the middle set or the lower set, you make it a bit less likely that either of the other players checks, and therefore this is a very good check by Garrett. And then on the river, again, very interesting. Garrett should be checking a reasonable amount still, because he doesn't really have that many value bets, and you're still blocking some of those checkbacks. Like if Stanley has ace-9 here, or Brown Baller has ace-9 here, or jack-9, 9-10, those types of hands, then they're going to be checking. And because Garrett has 2 of them in his hand, he makes it a little bit less likely that they have a hand like that, and a bit more likely that they're going to have a hand like King 10, Ace Queen or something like that they're now willing to value bet. And because the pot is 31 and there's at the very least 125 big blinds behind, Garrett has an incentive to check raise, because if he check raises all in, he can take the entire stack, but if he bets himself, he won't be able to do that. That's one thing. And then the other thing that will happen if you check here sufficiently with hands like pocket 9s, or sometimes like some flush or whatever, you make it a bit less incentivized for like someone like Stanley or Brown Baller to value bet a hand as weak as, I don't know, Queen 10 or possibly pocket jacks, but like, let's say Queen 10 is the weakest hands that might want to value bet. Because now they have to take into consideration the fact that Garrett will sometimes check raise them. So Garrett makes another check, which I really like, and we get a fold by Brown Baller, and I'm assuming that Garrett is going to go and raises pretty large here. I would guess at least to 80 big blinds. He doesn't really have the nuts, but effectively he has the nuts because Stanley would never check back a turn flush. Also, he's probably going to c-bet flush draws, or like, oh no wait, he's not c-betting, it's just a 3-bet. Yeah, he's probably going to bet his flushes most of the times, and his straights as well. So effectively he has the nuts here. And Garrett goes all in, and I really like this because he just has the nuts here. Stanley is severely capped here, and so Stanley has a decision now. Am I going to, like, basically Stanley, the best hand that Stanley has here is pocket 5s randomly, and then occasionally he's going to have a king, reasonable king, and now he needs to make the decision: am I going to call my king that is clearly indifferent at best here, or am I just going to fold range? If I'm folding range, then Gary is probably good enough to start shoving hands like 9-8, 9-8, pocket 8s with a spade, pocket 10s with a spade, pocket jacks with a spade, a random ace. Yeah, it's hard because he's cold calling pre-flop, but like, yeah, so those types of hands. Maybe occasional 9-8 is cold calling pre-flop, probably not though. And we get a call by Stanley, and Stanley has the winning hand. It seems like he has jack 10 for the for the straight flush, which is very unlucky for Garrett. I really do like this play, however. Like him having, okay, like specifically a straight flush, he might slow play because, well, you have got a straight flush and therefore you're going to deviate slightly or something like that. But generally speaking, this doesn't happen and you just have the notes. So very well played by Garrett, in my opinion. So a limp by Reza. George ISOs. George is playing relatively solid. And Garrett calls from the straddle, and UTG calls as well. Range check by Garrett, I'm assuming, because, well, he just doesn't really have too many hands that want to lead. And this is an interesting play. George c-bets here. We already discussed that you shouldn't really be c-betting very often in multi-way scenarios. On this board, though, I can't really blame him. Seems very reasonable. Garrett calls, which I really like because your hand seems very strong, but you're 250 big blinds deep, and George has 16 combinations of straights at least, probably has some jack 9 in there as well, so he has just a bunch of stronger hands, very simply put. He's occasionally going to have stuff like aces, and like you're doing okay versus aces but not great, so like calling is very good. Reza raises, and Reza plays a VPIP of 59.19, and this is generally a very weak line by recreationals. I'm just going to show you what it looks like when you are heads up, or when the recreational is heads up. Here you can see 49% weak. That is a lot of random weak stuff in there. I'll pull up Pio's range composition here so you can compare it. I guess I can do it like this. So not sure if you can see it, but 19% weak for Pio, and you can see it's just an awful lot stronger. Like there's just like this is about half of this range is just umpired hands. For Pio it's like 19%, like 1 in 5 hands, and here it is significantly weaker. So when this happens, generally speaking, like we got to be somewhat careful here, right? Because we can see 49% weak, but probably he's going to have a slightly stronger range on specifically a Broadway connected texture, as you can see here. And then also Reza raises multi-way, so it will be a bit stronger as well. However, we have 2-pair plus, and 2-pair plus is like the pink little section here. So we still beat the vast majority of both players of this player's hands. We are extremely deep, which makes it a bit uncomfortable, but I would still at the very least call, and I probably wouldn't raise, although with a 59 VPIP, if this guy has been spewing a bit, I might just want to get it in now. Regardless, we are never going to fold here. And Garrett calls, which is nice. He hits a king, which is interesting. Like, I think in theory you want to have some leads, because you're going, like, Reza isn't really raising random kings very often on the flop. Like if he has, let's say, king 8 or ace king or whatever, he's not really raising those hands. So it's quite often a hand that is a straight or some random 2-pair. And Garrett has probably more kings in his range. Having said that, we are playing versus a raging whale, and so I would just check and let him do his thing. We get a check back, which is cool. This is very interesting. I kind of hope that Garrett checks again, although shoving would be okay as well, I think. The reason why I hope he checks is, well, like the flush comes in, so if Reza has a very strong hand, he's going to bet anyway. We also block some random checkbacks. Let's say Reza randomly raises with Queen Jack or something like that, or Queen 10. On the flop, then now he's going to check back, and because we have a queen in our hand, we make it a bit less likely that our opponent is going to check back one of those queens, as he can't have Queen 10 with the Queen of Hearts, so, or Queen Jack with the Queen of Hearts. So I would probably check, but we're pretty close to shoving territory, so I wouldn't mind a shove either. I really like this check by Garrett. Keep calling him Gary, but yeah, check shoving here, really nice, reeled him in, and he had a flush. So very well played by Gary. I like that hand. That's it for this video. If you guys have any questions, drop them in the comment section down below. Like I said, I will be putting a link to the Dominate with Data course that I've done for Run It Once, that consists of 80-ish videos right now and a bunch of PDFs with data for both online as well as live. So imagine just looking at any node of the game tree, you're facing a raise on the flop by a recreational or regular, and you want to gain an understanding of how often do they do this, is it weak, is it strong. It's all going to be in that course. I'll put a link there in the comment section. For now, if you're playing today, good luck at the tables, and talk to you guys soon. Bye.